The Chebar River moved with a steady, low-frequency pulse against the reeds. Ezekiel stood on the bank, his boots sinking slightly into the damp silt. The air was still. The horizon was a flat, predictable line of gray. Then, the sky broke. It did not crack. It ripped. A sound like grinding tectonic plates tore through the atmosphere, a deafening, metallic shriek that vibrated in his very marrow. Ezekiel dropped his staff, his hands flying to his ears as the pressure in the air spiked, turning the atmosphere heavy and sharp. The gray expanse above vanished, replaced by a violent, swirling vortex of wind that descended from the north. It was not a natural storm. It carried a heat that scorched the skin, a dry electric intensity that made the hair on his arms stand upright. He stumbled backward, his heels catching on a stone, and fell hard into the mud. He looked up, his eyes watering, as the clouds began to pulse with a rhythmic, blinding light. The river stopped its gentle flow, the water churning in place. He was no longer alone in the landscape. The silence of the desert had been murdered, replaced by a roar. He braced himself, fingers digging into the earth. The fire did not consume the cloud. It gave it shape. From the heart of the furnace, 4 distinct silhouettes pushed outward, defying the heat that should have incinerated them. Ezekiel pressed his palms into the mud, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. As the light intensified, burning white-hot against the darkening horizon, the figures stepped forward, their forms shifting between the likeness of men and something far more complex. Each creature possessed 4 distinct faces, turned toward the cardinal points, their expressions fixed and unyielding. Above their shoulders, 4 wings unfurled with a sound like a sudden gust of wind through dry timber. 2 wings stretched upward, brushing against one another in a rhythmic metallic friction, while the other 2 covered their bodies. They did not walk, they hovered, suspended in the air by the sheer force of their presence. Ezekiel tried to blink, to clear the searing image from his vision, but the light held his gaze captive. The creatures moved in unison, their wings beating with a synchronized heavy cadence that pushed the air outward in waves. He watched the way their limbs articulated fluid, precise, and entirely alien. Ezekiel lowered his gaze, his eyes tracing the path from the hovering figures down to the earth. There, resting on the ground beside each creature, sat a wheel. They were not made of wood or iron. They shimmered with the cold, translucent intensity of beryl, catching the firelight and refracting it into jagged, prismatic splinters. He pushed himself up on his hands, crawling a few inches closer to get a better look. The structure defied his understanding of physics. Each wheel was not a single, solid ring, but 2 circles intersecting at right angles. This configuration formed a sphere-like frame that stood rigid against the uneven terrain. He watched, his jaw tightening, as he realized the implication of their design. Because of this dual-ring construction, the wheels possessed no front or back. They did not need to pivot or rotate to change course. He saw one wheel shift its orientation, sliding sideways with a fluid grinding sound that vibrated through the soles of his feet. It moved left, then instantly right, then forward, all without the slightest hesitation or change in its axis. The geometry was impossible, a paradox of motion that made his head spin. He reached out, his fingers trembling, wanting to touch the barrel surface to confirm it was solid. But he stopped. The wheels were not rolling, they were gliding. The synchronization was absolute. As the creatures lifted their wings, the wheels rose from the earth in the exact same heartbeat. There was no delay, no mechanical lag, and no sound of grinding metal. They ascended with the suddenness of lightning, leaving the mud undisturbed beneath them. Ezekiel watched, his neck muscles straining as he tried to follow their trajectory. When the creatures halted in midair, the wheels stopped instantly, hanging in the space as if anchored by an invisible force. He looked for the telltale signs of momentum, the sway, the drift, the settling of weight, but found none. They possessed the stillness of a statue and the velocity of a storm. He observed them as they shifted positions again. One moment they were hovering in a tight formation, and in the next, They had darted to the left, then backward, moving as a single, unified entity. The air around them did not even ripple with the turbulence one would expect from such mass. It was a display of pure, calculated efficiency. Ezekiel felt the vibration of their movement in his own chest, a low hum that resonated with the rhythm of rushing water. Ezekiel took a slow, deliberate step toward the nearest wheel. He needed to understand the surface that had appeared so smooth from a distance. As he drew within arm's reach, the light from the fire caught the outer rim, and his breath caught in his throat. The rim was not made of metal or stone. It was a dense, layered expanse of flesh and light. He squinted, leaning in until his face was inches from the curve. Thousands of eyes were embedded into the circumference. They were packed together with terrifying density, overlapping and spiraling around the entire frame. He recoiled, but the sensation of being watched did not vanish. Every single eye was open. They did not blink. They did not shift or wander. They were fixed, staring directly at him with a clarity that felt like a physical weight pressing against his skin. He tried to turn his head, to find a blind spot, but the eyes on the rotating rim tracked his movement with effortless precision. There was no escape from their field of vision. He felt exposed, stripped of his own privacy, as if every thought and muscle twitch were being recorded by the unblinking gaze of the wheel. The air grew heavy, charged with a static pressure that made the hair on his arms stand upright. Above him, the four creatures shifted. Their wings, broad and layered, snapped open with a sound like a sudden gale. The wheels beneath them hummed, the sound deepening into a low-frequency roar. Then, the ascent began. It was not a gradual lift, but a violent, instantaneous departure from the earth. The ground beneath the wheels cracked under the sudden displacement of air. Ezekiel stumbled back, his boots sliding in the loose soil. One moment they were anchored to the riverbank, and in the next, they were tearing through the sky. The spirit drove them with a singular, invisible force. He watched as they rose, the wheels spinning in perfect alignment with the beating wings, creating a vortex of light and sound. The wind generated by their departure whipped his face, stinging his skin and forcing him to shield his eyes. He felt the sheer scale of their power pressing down on him. They moved as one, a seamless integration of flesh, fire, and mechanical geometry, vanishing into the heights with a speed that left his senses reeling. The sky remained scarred by the path of their ascent, a lingering trail of fire that burned against his retinas. Ezekiel stood alone on the riverbank, but the sensation of being watched did not fade with their departure. The thousands of eyes he had witnessed seemed to remain etched into the very air around him, a persistent, unblinking presence. He opened his mouth to cry out, to name what he had seen, but the words died in his throat. His tongue felt heavy, useless against the weight of the reality he had just encountered. Language was a brittle, small thing. The intensity of the vision pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. His knees buckled. He hit the damp earth hard, the impact jarring his teeth, yet he did not move to rise. He pressed his forehead into the mud. Every muscle in his body trembled as he surrendered to the ground, his mind reeling, his voice silenced. The mud cooled his forehead, but the heat of the vision remained sharp in his mind. Ezekiel lay still, his breath shallow, replaying the movement of the wheels. He traced their paths in his memory, noting how they turned without hesitation, how they glided across the sky with absolute precision. These were not mere artifacts of a passing storm. They were the foundation of a throne, a mobile seat of power that defied the geography of his world. He realized then that the divine was not anchored to the stone walls of a temple or the borders of a city. The throne moved. It traversed the cosmos with a purpose that required no fixed location. It was a structure built for transit, for observation, and for total governance. He gripped the earth beneath him, feeling the solid reality of the ground. Yet his mind reached far beyond the riverbank. He understood that the authority he had witnessed was not limited by human architecture. It was a force that traveled wherever it willed, watching the horizon, the earth, and the expanse of the stars with unblinking clarity. The realization settled in his chest, heavy and absolute. The fire faded. The brilliance that had carved itself into the sky dissolved into the gray light of the riverbank. Yet, the silence did not return. The air hummed with the phantom vibration of wings and the rhythmic, grinding rotation of wheels. Ezekiel remained face down in the dirt, his hands clawing at the soil, trying to ground himself in the physical world. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image of the thousands of eyes remained, vivid and piercing. They were not watching the sky anymore. They were watching him. He shifted his weight, and the sensation of being observed intensified, as if the very air had become a lens focused entirely on his movements. He realized then that the vision was not a momentary event, but a permanent shift in the nature of his reality. Every step he took, every word he spoke, and every thought he harbored now existed under that unblinking divine scrutiny. He turned his head, looking toward the horizon, expecting to see only the familiar landscape. Instead, he saw the world through the lens of that infinite sight. The trees, the river, and the distant hills were all part of a vast, governed expanse. There was no corner of the earth where he could hide. The sound of the wings finally died away, leaving only the rushing water of the Chebar, but the weight of the gaze did not lift. He walked away from the river, his pace measured, fully aware that he was never truly alone.